As the global economy continues to struggle and teeters maybe on the brink of another recession, a lot of people out there are looking for somebody to blame. In his new book, The End of Progress, How Modern Economics Has Failed Us, Graham Maxton writes, we should blame the economists for their sloppy thinking and the politicians for selling us such twaddle. Graham, welcome. What is it about economics specifically that failed us? And you are an economist.
I am an economist. I started writing this book because I looked back at what Adam Smith had said about economics, because I was born near where he was born. And yes, I mean, he talked about free markets and he talked about free trade, but he also talked about social responsibility. And the way we've evolved in the last 30 years in particular, we've forgotten a lot of the principles that he had. So that the gap between rich and poor has got far bigger than it should have got. Right. We're not taxing the rich, and Adam Smith said we should. We're underpricing the world's resources, and we're not intervening in markets when we should.
Essentially, because most people on Wall Street, they always cite the invisible hand.
Yeah.
So they like parts of Adam Smith, but they don't, not other parts.
Exactly. They're taking the bits they like.
Yeah.
And he did advocate the invisible hand. But he also said that when markets get out of control, and typically the power of the labor unions or the power of companies gets too great, then you need to intervene. So there are times you need to intervene, and letting the debt bubble grow, as Greenspan and now Bernanke have done, has created this problem because they believed in the invisible hand, and the invisible hand doesn't do that.
Right. It isn't also, I mean, it's an academic term, the efficient market hypothesis. It seemed like, academia and economists, they agreed on this idea that the markets would take care of themselves. Was that the crux of the failure?
Yes, I mean, basically for the financial part of it, yes. I mean, there are lots of failures that we're facing. We're facing resource failures in terms of energy. There's some social failures as well, which are also caused by economics. But in terms of the financial aspect, if you look at the debt in the US, if you look at the debt in Europe, the debt in Japan as well, it was all caused by this belief that the markets were self-correcting. And we know, I mean, you just need to go back to the 30s, that markets are not self-correcting.
Right.
And Greenspan's undergraduate studies were based on what happens when you have housing bubbles. These people knew this, and yet they allowed this to happen. And you've got this division in society today, this gap between rich and poor, and this instability that we've got, and will last for years to come.
You do think it'll last for years to come? It's not a moment in time. Obviously, Occupy Wall Street, it's been spreading, and there's a lot of focus on this income inequality thing, but you don't think this is going away?
It's not. I mean, if you look, this all started 30 years ago with the Washington Consensus and Reagan and Thatcher in Britain, and this belief that we could have it all. And what you've created in the last 30 years is this mountain of debt: consumer debt, bank debt, government debt. And the reason the book's called The End of Progress is because the way we measure progress is in terms of economic growth. And we can't have economic growth now without adding more debt. And we already have too much debt. And so we have to stop the growth. We have to take a step back. We have to start saving again and get the economy back into balance. And there really is no option. It's that or bankruptcy.
Right, I was going to say, what happens if we don't deal with this?
I mean, we're in a very risky situation as a global economy right now, because we're in the situation where people are starting to blame other people, so that the Americans are blaming the Chinese, and the Chinese are also saying the Americans are unfair as well. And so there's this blame game going on, and that carries the risk that we then start imposing trade sanctions and then unraveling a lot of what's good in the world economy. And the whole pendulum, which has been about growth, begins to swing in the other direction with all sorts of social consequences. So I'm kind of saying, let's call for calm. Let's think about what we're doing. Let's realize that when we think about growth, we also have social responsibilities to those around us, and think about the principles rather than just about the money.
Right. So the title of the book is The End of Progress: How Modern Economics Has Failed Us. Is it intentionally a nod to the end of history? Is it a bookend to that? And which I'll know, it wasn't the end of history. So maybe hopefully you'll be wrong. Not that it isn't. This isn't the end of progress.
In 2008, the world economy reached a turning point. It wasn't just a bump in the road. We reached the end of a 30-year period of history, and we can't carry on that path.
So that was deregulation, belief in free markets, all these things.
The belief that growth was going to go on forever, the belief that we could carry on borrowing, the belief that consumption was the goal, all of that has to change because we simply cannot carry on borrowing anymore. I mean, if you look at the average American consumer, they're borrowed beyond their capacity. The banks are bust, even although we don't talk about that. The government, I mean, the federal government's debts are just off the scale. And at some point, you have to stop borrowing or you go bust, and you have to start paying that money back. And nobody wants to do this. Nobody wants to hear the message that we can't carry on growing forever. But as I think Jeff Kay's environmental advisor said, you know, on a finite planet, the only people that believe we can grow forever are either mad or economists.
All right, we got to leave it there, Graham. Thanks very much.